Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video will be entitled The Subway Vigilante, the story of Bernhard Goetz. Bernhard Hugo Goetz. Alright, continuing on my theme of New York and Manhattan and the Bronx, which features into virtually all my stories, which leave trails of corn that lead their way out to California, either to Sand Hill Road, where the private bankers for the clandestine services are located, or to Hollywood, murder most foul. There's a tremendous correlation and causation between the Bronx, New Rochelle, New York, Mount Vernon, New York, Brooklyn, Manhattan, East and West Side, Manhattan, and California, Hollywood, Beverly Hills, Bel Air, Benedict Canyon, and San Francisco, and Atherton, and Menlo Park, and Stanford University. And so, where do I begin? I think we'll just give you the background on the story. You know, this is going to be kind of a superficial analysis of the Bernhard Goetz subway shooting. And so I'll just read for you. On December 22nd, 1984, Bernhard Goetz shot 4 young black men on a New York subway train around West 14th Street station in Manhattan, after the young men allegedly tried to rob him. All 4 of the teenagers survived. However, Darrell Cabby was paralyzed and suffered brain damage as a result of his gunshot wound. Bernhard Goetz then fled to Bennington, Vermont, before eventually surrendering to the police there 9 days after the shooting. He was initially charged with attempted murder, assault, reckless endangerment, and possessing several firearms in New York City, where he did not have a license to carry firearms. Bernhard Goetz had applied for a license to carry a concealed weapon and was denied. However, he did get a permit for his guns in Florida, in and around Orlando, Florida. There was a trial. Of course, Bernhard Goetz was represented by a Jewish lawyer from the Bronx, a very famous CIA lawyer by the name of Barry Schlotnick. We'll come back to him later. So, Bernhard Goetz was dubbed the Subway Vigilante by the New York press. For his supporters, he became to symbolize New Yorkers' frustrations with the high crime rates of the 1980s. But questions about race and racism and statements made by Bernie Goetz and public relations issues were hotly contested, as they always are in a woke society of clandestine services which seeks to divide all peoples so that they never unite and rise up against the establishment. The incident occurred in the early afternoon of Saturday, December 22nd. All 4 young men, I'll give you their names in a moment, all 4 of them are from the Bronx. So, isn't that ironic that these hooligans, Barry Allen, age 19, Troy Canty, age 19, Darrell Cabby, age 19, James Ramsour, age 18. These 4 black boys came from the Bronx. These hoodlums who allegedly were taking the subway to go rob a video store on a Saturday. Probably not the smartest thing to do. So they're out of their zip code. They're near Greenwich Village. So they're pretty far away from the Bronx. You know, Bronx is the home to Sidney Gottlieb, the #1 Jewish criminal from the Bronx, the head of MK Ultra for the CIA. that's responsible for creating mayhem and chaos and destruction and homicides across the world, the whole world. The Bronx is also home to Jewish Mark Levin, who changed his name to Lane so that you would believe his John F. Kennedy quasi-pseudo documentary videos, which are completely fraudulent and conceal the fact that Dallas was a port facility and that the kill shot came from the railroad tracks, triple underpass. Jerome Kohlberg, one of the world's premier CIA clandestine bankers, came from New Rochelle, New York. Don Valentine attended Fordham University and grew up in the Bronx. Don Valentine founded Sequoia Capital that brought you FTX with Sam Bankman-Fried, another Jewish boy. Ann Kernan attended Fordham University and was poached by none other than Albert Laverne, CIA psychiatrist, who was a professor of sociology at Fordham University. Chris Como attended Fordham University in the Bronx, as did his older brother Andrew Como, who graduated from Fordham University and went on to become the fake governor of the state of New York. They came from the Bronx. Alan Alda of MASH, he came from the Bronx. Peter Falk of Colombo, a Jewish man who pretended to be an Italian for his whole career, came from the Bronx. Bernie Hugo Goetz, his mother is Jewish, so he's Jewish, and he was living in Greenwich Village at the time of this shooting. The subway train was the R22, I think R stands for route. It's a 10-train subway, and Bernhard Goetz entered the 7th of the 10 train cars where the incident happened. There were a minimum of 15 other witnesses present for the shooting. Bernhard Goetz did not flee the scene. He remained there when the conductor of the train came and asked for his gun. He refused to give it up, and then he calmly walked home. Well, he calmly walked up to the street level, called a cab, and then took the cab to his apartment, which couldn't have been too far away from the 14th Street subway where he boarded the train. He then went home and gathered up his belongings, rented a car, and drove to Vermont, where he burned the jacket, the blue jacket that he was wearing, and he destroyed the gun and threw the pieces into a forested area in and around the Bennington, Vermont area. All right. Now, let me give you some disturbing details that the media missed and glossed over in this story. Okay, because it's quite disturbing. So Bernhard Goetz had a neighbor by the name of Myra Friedman, another Jewish lady. Myra Friedman is Bernhard Goetz's neighbor. Now, can't really get a straight answer of how close they were. I think they were pretty friendly from their interactions. They had multiple interactions before and after these shootings. And Myra Friedman never called the New York Police Department at any time, even though Bernie Goetz had confessed what he did to her. She did not call the police. And again, 9 days elapsed from the time of the shooting before Bernhard Goetz walked into a Vermont police station and surrendered himself. Myra Friedman never called the police. It's also alleged that that Bernhard Goetz gave Myra Friedman 2 pistols in a hat box for safekeeping. Don't really know if that's a true story or a made-up story. You should know that, remember, Janis Joplin, who mysteriously was murder-suicide, died on October 4th, 1970, at the Landmark Hotel next door to the Magic Castle, next door to where Charlie Manson used to have an apartment, 1 block from where Charlie Manson lived. Janis Joplin had a publicist, and her publicist was named Myra Friedman. I wonder if it's the same Myra Friedman who promoted Janis Joplin. Janis Joplin was part of the CIA. She was part of the Haight-Ashbury Project, the HAP project. She had a provisional home in Haight-Ashbury. as did Paul Stein, the last Zodiac victim. He had a home 200 yards away from where Patricia Hearst had a home when the FBI couldn't find her. Paul Stein, age 29, yellow cab driver. He's living in Haight-Ashbury on Fell Street. He's 300 yards away from the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic where Abigail Folger's mother is the boss. He lives 300 yards from her. He lives 100 yards from Patty Hearst. He lives 250 yards from where Janis Joplin had a place next to the Grateful Dead house, which is right where Patty Hearst was staying. It's right near St. Agnes Parochial Catholic Elementary School in San Francisco. Anyway, I'm strongly suspecting that Myra Friedman was Janis Joplin's publicist. Janis Joplin would be 41 years old at the time of these these shootings. They were adjudicated, and he was found not guilty of murder. He was found guilty of carrying an unlicensed firearm on the subway. Bernhard Goetz was 37 years old when these shootings of the 4 boys happened. Had Janis Joplin been alive, she would have been 41 years old. Her publicist probably would have been in her 40s. I wonder if Myra Friedman was in her 40s. I bet she was. Also, the media forgot to mention that Myra Friedman was a key witness in the case against Bernhard Goetz. You know, she was rehearsed and worked over by the district attorney, so you can't really believe her testimony. I'm going to post her testimony, or some of her testimony, and you can read it. But just remember, in a courtroom, everything's decided outside the courtroom, and what goes on the transcripts is what's been rehearsed, or else they'll have an adjournment. But what I wanted to tell you is that at the time of the trial of Bernhard Goetz, Myra Friedman was working for the New York Magazine, and she was writing an article about the Bernie Goetz shooting of these 4 boys, which would have had a social engineering message content. So do you see how inappropriate this is, that you have a member of the media, Myra Friedman, who may or may not have been the publicist for Janis Joplin, a rock star, and she's writing articles for the New York Magazine about a trial for which she's a key witness in, because she had 2 telephone conversations with Bernhard Goetz, which she tape recorded. Now that's a red flag. When was the last time you tape recorded your neighbor's telephone call to you? Number 2 is she had a personal meeting with him on December 30th, whereupon she claimed that he gave her a hat box that contained 2 pistols. And she suggested that she throw them in the river, into the Hudson River. That was what Myra Friedman testified having said. There's really no rebuttal to that. We don't really know if it's true or not. The jury didn't exactly believe Myra Friedman's testimony because they were concerned that she worked for the New York Magazine and that maybe she was dressing up the story and embellishing it. Also, they really sort of discredited Myra Friedman. Myra Friedman was threatened as a co-conspirator or a criminal felony after the fact in the concealment of the crime, because 9 days elapsed and she never alerted the police of his whereabouts or his contact with her. The police had visited her when they went over to look at Bernhard Goetz's apartment. Now this is astounding to me because how did the police find Myra Friedman? Did they knock on all the doors and interview all the other tenants? And if so, why aren't the other tenants called as witnesses in this case? They seem to zero right in. The New York Police Department zeroed in on Myra Friedman as if they knew something, that she was his control operative, which I'm sort of think she's a control agent. She was Janis Joplin's control agent, assuming it's the same publicist, right? All right, so you also should know that in childhood, Bernhard Goetz attended schools in Switzerland. Now that is a huge red flag because his parents did not live in Europe. Typically the American School for Americans, or the Swiss School for the Americans, or the American School in Switzerland for the Americans of the College of Corporations, like, Chevron, Shell Oil, the big corporations send their children to these schools. like Doris and Paul Tate sent Sharon Tate to the Venezia School for the Americans for military intelligence children. We had the same situation going on with Bernhard Goetz. Let me see here. This is a pretty impressive resume that Bernhard Goetz had. All right. We don't have all the information that I want on Bernhard Hugo Goetz, but I've got some information. And he went to, let me find it here. Wow. I had it and now it's gone. He, like I said, he went to Switzerland for private schools. He came back. He went to New York University, where he received degrees in nuclear physics. And darn, where did it go? Electrical engineering, but he didn't go into that field. He worked for his father in Florida for a residential development company, meaning real estate development. And I find this kind of a paradox, because the guy was obviously intelligent, and he should have found a home at one of the College of Corporations, right? Anyway, he didn't really pursue his education from NYU. And then for his trial, I don't know how he was able to get this unless the CIA helped him. He's assigned Barry Schlotnick, who is a Orthodox Jewish man, Russian Jew immigrants from the Bronx. He was born in 1939. Barry Schlotnick, you may remember, before he represented Bernhard Goetz in 1985, he was involved with the Joe Colombo and the Colombo crime family of New York, where he went to the Supreme Court and won an appeal regarding Joe Colombo, the boss of the Colombo family, which is clandestine service, CIA, if you didn't know. That makes Barry Schlotnick a CIA lawyer, much in the same way as Melvin Belli was, in the same way that F. Lee Bailey was, in the same way that Alan Dershowitz is. His representation of Jeffrey Epstein seals the deal for the blabbermouth Alan Dershowitz, who wouldn't shut up with the O.J. Simpson case. O.J. Simpson was a clandestine service supervised murder trial where O.J. was acquitted. In this case, you remember that Bernhard Goetz was acquitted of murder. He was only convicted of carrying the illegal firearm. Barry Schlotnick also represented John Gotti and was the lead counsel for John Gotti. Again, that's a member of the Genovese family, I believe. So again, more CIA stuff there. He represented Anthony Quinn in his divorce, and he represented the wife of Bryant Gumbel in their divorce. He represented Steve Wynn of the Las Vegas hotels, the Mirage, and I forgot the Wynn Hotel, and Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega. He also represented Rabbi Meyer Kahn. So this guy is plugged in, this Barry Schlotnick. So in other words, Bernhard Goetz got the cream of the crop from the CIA, and he was acquitted. So the fix was in on this case from the beginning. I don't think the lawyers have much to do with the outcome. I think there are other forces in play, like the judges. I think the judges are completely controlled. And the juries are not shown all the information, just like in this case. They didn't get all the information. They got some though. I think they were on to Myra Friedman. So I don't have a complete assessment of the of whether this was a staged event or not. I'm not going to say. I mean, I've personally been involved with scary situations on the Bay Area rapid transit train late at night because I worked until 10, 11 o'clock at night often, and there were not many people on the train at that hour, and except criminals and people like me coming home from work. So I understand the predicament that people can feel. This was a Saturday afternoon, however, and it shouldn't have been. It's not the same thing as portrayed, by Charles Bronson in Death Wish, which, in case you didn't know, Death Wish was a movie about a subway vigilante. And that film was released July 24th, 1974, virtually 10 years prior to the Bernhard Goetz shooting of the 4 black boys. Sort of like Charlie Chan in Treasure Island being released 30 years and 33 days before Paul Stine got shot in the head by a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. Paul Stine, who lived in Haight-Ashbury but was killed in Presidio Heights, where Paul Pelosi and Nancy Pelosi lived, and Sharon Tate's father lived there too, as well as Diane Goldman Feinstein, the fake senator from California. All right, well, anyway, what I will say is that in the Bernie Goetz case, we have a number of red herrings. We have what appears to be the publicist of a CIA rock star, Myrna Friedman, who may have represented Janis Joplin, who was murdered in Hollywood, in West Hollywood, next to the Magic Castle at the Landmark Motel, which is a high concentration area for CIA activities. That's home to Charlie Manson. That's home to Charlie Watson. That's home to Bernard Lotsa Papa Crow. That's home to the Will Smith, Chris Rock bitch slap at the Dolby Theater, which is across the street from where Janis Joplin was murdered. It's less than 1 block away. It's where Ashley Ellerin was bayoneted 48 times to death 2 blocks up the hill. It's where Lindsay Pearlman was murdered and Runyon Canyon entrance, about a half a mile from where Janis Joplin was murdered, and about a half a mile from where John Belushi was murdered. So what I'm telling you is that when a witness in a murder case works for the New York Magazine and still appearing as a witness for the prosecution, and she's tape recording the phone calls of her neighbor, Bernhard Goetz, I smell a rat, okay? I smell a rat. She's part of the crisis acting. She is part of the operation. She is a key person in this case. That much I can say. Mira Friedman is as much to blame of this shooting as is Bernhard Goetz, who had previously been accosted on the Canal line, the Canal Street subway line, and police did nothing to assuage his fears, nor did they make any arrest. All right. I think when you go to a school in Europe, when your parents aren't working for a big corporation, that's a red flag. I think when you score a CI lawyer like Barry Schlotnick from the Bronx, you're plugged in. When you have a publicist woman who's a writer for the New York Times as your neighbor, recording phone calls and being real friendly for you for 9 days and not calling the police and then testifying against you at your murder trial, I think you have a staged trial. So I'm not sure about the shooting of Barry Allen, Troy Canty, Daryl Cabby, James Russ, Ram Shore, except that they're all from the Bronx. And I know the Bronx is a melting pot for clandestine service activities. So maybe these 4 were put together in the Bronx, sent down there, intercepted by Bernhard Hugo Goetz. Then they were all shot. None of them died. Nobody died. One was, like I said, had brain damage and is paralyzed. But the Bronx is a place where felony crimes are hatched and planned. Fordham University is a bullseye for that. And what do you know? So there's a lot of coincidences coincidences in the subway vigilante Bernie Goetz case that looks a lot like the murders we have out in California. There's a lot of similarities. And I'm going to call definitely the trial portion and the Barry Schlotnick defense as completely clandestine service, staged event. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Please share and like my videos. I am shadow banned. Bye-bye.